Hold on, folks. Henny B is going to peddle something. Ask anyone that knows me, they'll tell you I am not an energy drink kind of guy. I am naturally hyper as it is, and I don't need it. But I know a lot of people who are, and lately they've been drinking Dubby like it's going out of style. Dubby is a flavored powdered supplement that you mix directly into your water. It promises no crash, no jitters, no angst. Head over to Dubby.gg today and enter the coupon code WW1POD for a 10% discount. That's Dubby.gg, and it's proudly made in the USA. I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Today's episode, Seeking Providence. The tea kettle steamed quietly on the stove as Bridget poured the hot water into the cups, watching the tea leaves unfurl. She cherished this part of the evening when the only sounds were the gentle rustling of the newspaper her husband Samuel was reading and the light clinking of pots, pans, and plates as her daughter Elsie cleaned up after the evening meal. She placed the cups of tea onto saucers and set them on the table next to the cream and sugar she had arranged earlier. Samuel looked up from his newspaper. "Thank you, dear." She planted a kiss on his forehead and took her place at the table across from him. "How was your day?" He folded the newspaper, set it down on the table, and reached for his cup. "Well, things are getting interesting to say the least. This war is taking its toll. The rumor is that the Crown is considering conscription." She had never heard the term before. Conscription? What is that? He took a sip from his cup and gently placed it back down, the porcelain making a high-pitched yet quiet clinking sound. "We don't have enough people volunteering throughout the Empire. They're thinking about forcing people to join." This shocked her to her core. She had never heard of such a thing. Can they do that? Force someone to join a war? They can, and they've done it before. He picked up his cup again. "My concern is Sean. He's 17 now. If this war is not over 8 months from now when he turns 18, he's in severe danger of being conscripted." She looked at him with worry. "But you work in the government. Isn't there something you can do to keep him home? Keep him safe? That is, if the war lasts that long?" He took another sip of his tea. "I'm a low-level aide. I won't even know who's on the list to be conscripted. Forget having any actual influence. Besides, it's just a rumor." The sound of the door opening caught her attention, and she watched her almost adult son, Sean, walk in. He was a tall, slender boy with dark hair and dark eyes. "Good evening, son. Where have you been? You missed dinner." Sean removed his shoes and placed an old, worn football down on the floor. "Out at the park, kicking the ball around. Sorry I missed dinner. Is there a plate by chance?" She gestured to a side table near the stove. "Over there. Come join us." Sean retrieved his food and took a seat at the table. "What are we talking about?" Bridget and Samuel exchanged glances. She hesitated, not wanting to burden Sean with their worries. "Nothing," she said, but Samuel's straightforward response, "The war," made her heart sink. She could see the flicker of anxiety in Sean's eyes and wondered how much he had already pieced together. Bridget noticed Sean's hand trembling slightly as he took a bite of bread, his eyes darting between her and Samuel. "What's going on with the war?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but the quiver in his voice betrayed his worry. With a look at her husband, she conveyed her thoughts. "You brought it up. You tell him." He sighed heavily, understanding the message that had been silently expressed. "Well, people are talking about conscription to get more soldiers to France. We're worried that the war may not be over when you turn 18. She watched her son take a drink of water. "That's no big deal. I'll just move to a neutral country, like Switzerland, or even better, America." He got excited as he finished. Bridget's hands inadvertently rushed to cover her mouth as she gasped. Samuel, however, seemed calm, even patient. "Son, you cannot just flee your home to some neutral country because you do not wish to fight." Bridget saw the flash of fear in Sean's eyes as he swallowed his last piece of bread. Why not? Would you rather I end up like Tommy Jensen down the street? He challenged, but she sensed the desperation behind his bravado. Everyone in the neighborhood had heard the story of Tommy Jensen. He was a 22-year-old who had quit university to volunteer for the war effort. 3 months later, his parents received his personal effects and a letter of condolence from the Crown and the New Zealand government. She knew that there were many other stories that ended in a similar fashion, stories she just had not been told yet. I do have an uncle who moved to America 8 years ago, to a place called Providence, Rhode Island. This was a response Samuel had not expected. Bridget, are you suggesting that we consider moving? Moving based on a rumor? Elsie, who had long ago finished her kitchen chores and had been reading a book by the fireplace, chimed in. They are neutral. In America, that is. According to the papers, nobody there wants to fight. Bridget glanced over at her precocious 15-year-old daughter and gave her a nod of approval. Bridget had never considered moving abroad before. This was new territory for her, but she knew that the last thing she wanted was to send her son off to a far-off land to fight. Samuel kept his demeanor calm, as he generally did. Those who worked in the government learned early on to keep their egos in check when necessary, and for Samuel, that trait had seeped into his home life as well. I feel outnumbered here, but please keep in mind that this feels like a drastic approach to a problem that's yet to manifest itself. It's only a rumor. Bridget traced her finger thoughtfully around the rim of her teacup. I remember when the fighting in Europe was just a whisper, a distant concern. It wasn't long before that rumor became reality. I don't want to wait for another whisper to become another tragic truth, one that will, this time, affect our family. Samuel nodded in acceptance. She knew by the look on his face that her words had struck a chord. The topic had not been touched on for almost half a year, but she knew that tonight it would come up again. She had been walking through the town square, and the talk of the day was of conscription. She heard the talk of it everywhere she went, in whispered conversations at the market, in heated debates outside the pub, and in the worried murmurs of mothers clutching their children a little tighter. The air was thick with anxiety and anticipation, and it seemed that no one could escape the shadow of what could very likely come. The air in the home was thick with the smell of the mutton broth that rested in the center of the table next to a plate of cheese sandwiches. The family sat around the table eating in their customary silence. It was Elsie who broke the silence. I heard something at school today. Bridget rounded on her. Elsie, we don't discuss matters until after dinner. Samuel, who was normally stricter about such matters, seemed curious, though. What did you hear? He raised his hand, palm out, when Bridget attempted to protest. Elsie looked at both of her parents, seemingly not knowing what to do. Bridget put on a polite yet forced smile. Go on, dear. Tell us. It's okay. She would discuss this breach of family etiquette with Samuel later. She was trying to enforce his rules, and now she looked like the bad guy. Elsie sat straight up and started in. Well, everybody is talking about... What's that word? Conscription, Sean added. She perked up more. Yeah, conscription. Everybody is saying that it could come later this year, maybe in the late summer or early fall. Bridget noticed then that Sean was not eating. He was merely swirling his spoon in the mutton soup. I heard a lot of that talk in the market today, too. I'm sure your father will tell us everything he knows after we're finished eating. They finished their meal in silence. When they were done, the family went about their customary routine. Elsie cleaned the dishes, Bridget started the water for tea, Samuel read the newspaper, and Sean read a book. Then it was time. The family gathered again at the table with their teacups and saucers in front of them. She looked expectantly across the table at Samuel. He began. It is true that late last year, just about the time we talked about it, a military service act was being discussed in the hallways. Since then, the talks have gained steam. A lot of steam, and I think it's going to pass. Bridget lowered her head into her hands and spoke softly. Sean turns 18 in a month. She looked up to see her husband nodding slowly. Sean looked on solemnly. What are the odds that I would even be conscripted? Josephine, at school? Her brother died over there. They brought his body home but had to have a closed casket service. It was that bad, Elsie added. Samuel again nodded towards the speaker and continued. There are many stories like that, my love, but many more where all the family receives is a notice and a box of personal effects. Bridget was having difficulty hiding her anxiety now. I think we should go. Go to a neutral country. I wrote my uncle some time ago, and we can go to Providence, Rhode Island. I don't know much about it, but it has to be better than living in fear. She watched Samuel intently as she spoke. His face remained passive, as if he knew what she was going to say. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. It's 1916. My grandfather would have been 100 years old this year. When he was but 19, he was accused of stealing a piece of bread. He was tried and found guilty, even though he always claimed he was innocent. Bridget and the children knew this story, but they sat in silence as he continued. He was taken to Australia. It was a penal colony then, and there he served 10 years. 10 years for bread. When he was finally released, he crossed the Tasman Sea to come here to New Zealand. He found a job, found your grandmother, and founded a family. She watched as something in his face changed. Was it sorrow? Was it guilt? She could not quite place it. It was a side of her husband of 20 years she had never seen. He stood up and paced near the fireplace. My father was born and raised here. I was born and raised here. All of you have been born and raised here. Leaving here would be leaving everything we have ever known. Everyone we have ever known. She saw a tear form in his eye. Another thing she had never seen before, and this made her tear up as well. What are we going to do, Samuel? She watched as he stopped and stood motionless for what seemed like an eternity. Neither her nor her children could take her eyes off of him. He slowly turned around. If my grandfather can start a new life in a new place, so can we. Did you receive word from Providence after you wrote to your uncle? She felt a wave of relief wash over her. She could not believe what had just happened. I did. My uncle would take us in temporarily until we found our own lodging. He said you could probably work for the city or the state. He put his hands behind his back and turned again to face the fireplace. Good. I'll purchase passage and we'll leave in 2 weeks. Sell everything we have. Pack only clothes. He turned back around. 2 months from now, we will be starting a new life. The journey was long and tiring. After departing New Zealand on the SS Makura, a steamer operated by the Union Steamship Company, they disembarked in San Francisco, California, where they cleared customs and were to board a train bound for New York. From there, Providence. As the train left San Francisco, she couldn't help but notice the resemblance the area had to their former home. Lush green hills, bodies of water, and a landscape of modest homes greeted her as they began their journey. It wasn't until the train emerged from the Sierra Nevada mountains that the landscape changed, looking so different from anything she was used to. There was a lot less green and a lot more brown. Their journey continued through Salt Lake City, a bustling hub surrounded by towering mountains and the vast Great Salt Lake. The train pushed eastward through the Rocky Mountains where the dramatic peaks and deep canyons painted a picture of untamed wilderness. In Denver, the Queen City of the Plains, they experienced the blend of frontier spirit and emerging modernity. The train then carried them across the expansive plains of Nebraska, where endless fields stretched to the horizon under a wide open sky. In Chicago, she was awed by the towering buildings, the largest she had ever seen, and the vibrant hustle and bustle of one of the nation's largest cities. This bustling metropolis was a stark departure from the open plains they had crossed. During their brief layover, they absorbed the city's energetic atmosphere before continuing their journey east. The train rolled through the industrial heartland, passing through cities like Cleveland and Pittsburgh, where smokestacks and factories spoke of the country's burgeoning industrial might. Crossing into Pennsylvania, the lush, rolling hills of the Appalachians provided a scenic backdrop as they neared the East Coast. Finally, they arrived in New York City, a metropolis that seemed to pulse with life at every corner. After a brief stay, they boarded another train for the final leg of their journey. As she stepped off the train and onto Rhode Island soil for the first time, she realized that Samuel's prediction had been nearly spot on. It had been a month and a half since the night they made their decision, just shy of his 2-month estimate. He is a smart man, she thought. He stepped off the train and stood next to her. She laid her head against his arm and smiled. They had been at her uncle's large Victorian home for 2 weeks. Her uncle was a special aide to the governor of Rhode Island and lived lavishly as a result. He was able to secure employment for Sean as a low-level aide. Samuel was able to parlay his experience with the New Zealand government to secure a high-level job with the city of Providence. Bridget sat in a corner of the small room she shared with Samuel on the second level of her uncle's home. She had found a copy of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott downstairs and had asked her uncle for permission to read it. The book was a welcome escape, offering a glimpse into the lives of the March sisters and their own struggles and triumphs. She was just starting on chapter 2 when Samuel walked in. He closed the door gently behind him and removed his hat, hanging it on a nearby hook. "Hello, love," he said, his voice filled with the weariness of a long day but softened by the sight of his wife. Bridget looked up from the book and smiled. "Hello, Samuel. How was your day?" Samuel walked over to the small table by the window and began to loosen his tie. "Busy, as always, but productive. We're making progress on several fronts." He sat down on the edge of the bed, his eyes catching the title of the book in Bridget's hands. "What are you reading?" "Little Women," she replied, holding up the book. "It's quite engaging. It's about 4 sisters growing up during the American Civil War. Their father is away serving as a chaplain, and their mother is raising them on her own." He took the book and examined the cover. "Sounds like a fascinating read." "I have something to tell you." She sat straight up. In her experience, nothing good ever came after those words. "What is it? Did something happen?" He looked weary from his day, but a smile crept across his face. "No, nothing bad. In fact, quite the opposite. I managed to save us a good amount of money from before we left home. Today I went and saw a house. I bought it. We can move in as soon as we want to." Bridget could barely contain her surprise and excitement. "Savings? Really? You bought us a house? Where is it?" Samuel looked around the room, trying to gain his directional bearings. He then pointed towards the wall to her left. "It's 2 blocks that way, I believe." He then changed his arm position to point to the adjacent wall. "Or that way. I'm not quite sure, but it's 2 blocks away. That part I know." With both hands raised to her mouth in an excited gesture, Bridget rose from the bed and ran to embrace him. "Oh, Samuel, this is wonderful news. I can't believe it." Samuel hugged her tightly, his weariness momentarily forgotten in the face of her joy. They stood there for a moment, holding each other. The new beginning they dreamed of along the journey was coming true. As the calendar changed from 1916 to 1917, Bridget reflected back on the previous year and was in awe of how much things had changed. She started the year in fear of Sean being forced to go to war. As the year progressed and the prospect of conscription became more likely, the decision was made to uproot from everything they've ever known and rebuild their life in the United States. There were some commonalities shared between the cities and towns in New Zealand and those in Rhode Island. In Wellington, much like in Providence, there was no central town square where vendors peddled their meats, cheeses, and vegetables. Instead, both the cities had multiple public markets and bustling streets throughout the town that served the same purpose. Their new home in Rhode Island was conveniently located near the largest of these markets, the Providence Market House. However, Bridget, who had always been accustomed to walking to the local markets, now had to deal with the most notable difference between the two cities: snow, and lots of it. It was late February, and although snow still covered the ground, the people of Providence, including Bridget, were optimistic for spring. Bridget had yet to experience the spring or summer in Rhode Island, and she and Elsie were anxious to see the beauty that everyone said would bloom around them. Today, as they walked through the market as they did every Thursday, there was a strange feeling in the air. Bridget had felt this before, in Wellington, when conscription was being discussed. A knot tightened in her stomach. She decided not to ask anyone what was going on. Ignorance is bliss, she thought. So she and Elsie bought eggs, potatoes, and some meat and headed for home. Samuel was quiet during tea that evening, and once again the familiar uneasy feeling gnawed at her. What was wrong? Sean was unusually quiet as well. Normally, he would be boasting about the goings-on in the state government office or even talking about the girls he wished to court. But there was no such talk today. Bridget glanced at Elsie, and the two shared an anxious look. Bridget finally could take no more. She sat her cup down, and it landed with a rather loud clank. "Samuel, Sean, what is going on? Something is off tonight." She looked on as the two of them shared a look. Were they worried about something? Did something happen? After a few tense moments, Samuel finally cleared his throat. "Today we were told about a telegram. It's a telegram that was intercepted by the British. They decided to tell the president about it 2 days ago. We're just being told now. The press will be told in a few days." She felt the look of apprehension and worry cross her own face. "What did it say? Is it bad?" It was Sean who spoke now. "It's not good. So far America stayed out of the war because public opinion is dead set against it. We think that'll change when the contents of this telegram are released." This was something she just didn't believe. That's nonsense. Everyone in this country is against us joining that war. If the sinking of a ship couldn't sway that, then what could? Samuel and Sean shared another look. Samuel spoke in his normal, calm tone. This telegram can." Still unconvinced, she asked, "What is in it, this telegram?" Samuel continued. "Germany has asked Mexico to fight the United States to keep the U.S. busy and out of Europe. In exchange, they've offered to help Mexico after they've finished in Europe, and Mexico will be able to regain Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona as a prize for the victory Germany guarantees. That's the gist of it." She still was not overly convinced. "I don't think it'll change that much, will it?" It was Sean that spoke next. "It changes everything, Ma. Once the press prints this, America will have the public backing to join the war. And then, just as back home, conscription." 4 months later, Bridget found herself in New York City, standing on a dock with Samuel and Elise as they watched the steamer carry Sean and many other sons of the United States off to Europe and to war. This has been World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show wherever you find this podcast, and don't forget to throw us a comment and a rating. We are on Facebook. Just search and like the official World War I Stories page. You can also join me on Blue Sky, where I go by the handle WW1Stories_HennyB. World War I Stories is now featured on Rabbit in Red Radio, with new episodes streaming Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. They also have all episodes available on demand. Visit Rabbit in Red Radio for this and many other independent podcasts. And last but not least, would you like your name read on the show? Become a producer by contributing to our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I Stories. I'm very grateful to everyone who downloads and listens to this show. I'm Henny B, and see you next time on World War I Stories.